Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be watching a Fire of Learning video on why Napoleon and Russia almost invaded India together. What is this? What's going on? I have no idea. In this video, we take a look at the forgotten plans of Paul the First of Russia and Napoleon Bonaparte discussed to invade India together and divide it between themselves. I've never heard of this before, so this is going to be interesting to see, to learn about. Fire of Learning, I've watched their channel for a long time. I've really enjoyed their channel, so I highly recommend it. Link to this video will be in the description down below. I say before we get any further into it, we should watch it. We should watch it before I read, go and read the comments or something. I don't want to be spoiled. I have no idea. I've never heard of this before. So again, link to the video, description down below. Let's get into it. Yeah.
Many miles from Marengo, Austerlitz, and Waterloo, India is not typically the first place to come to mind when one brings up the Napoleonic Wars.
Yeah,
However,
never.
A little-known fact is that India was actually almost the setting for what could have been a very major Napoleonic War, one which could have changed the course of history. Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome to Fire of Learning. Today, we're going to be discussing secret plans that the Russians and the French made to invade India together and expel the British from the region in the early 1800s to claim it for themselves.
So it was, wow, was this what they were going to do? The South, the French were going to take the South, and the Russians were going to take the North, huh? That's kind of crazy. The North-South divide. Even then, the North-South divide could have happened. Wow.
Before we begin, we would like to mention that this video is made without the use of AI. Our sources are listed in a link in the description.
Cool.
Let's start with the backstory. Before Napoleon took over France, the Russians, like most of Europe, had opposed the French Revolution, which began in 1789. Russia was ruled by an absolute monarchy, and feared both the instability that a belligerent France and its revolutionary ideals could bring to Europe.
Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Huh. Oh, Latvia and Estonia were part of Russia back then. I wonder when they broke off. I'm not too familiar with like Latvia, Estonia and all that.
However, Russia did not join the war of the First Coalition against France led by Britain, Austria, and Prussia. As the war progressed, the Russian Empress Catherine the Great did plan to send forces to join, planning to send a force of 60,000 to the effort. However, before Russia could formally enter the war, in 1796, Catherine died and her son Paul became Tsar. Paul was a staunch traditionalist who hated the revolution, but did not feel it was best for his country to become involved in the war, preferring to focus on domestic affairs, and thus canceled his
as
mother's
it should be, as it should be. One's country, the domestic affairs should come first, no matter what.
But when French expansion continued and was deemed too threatening, he rejoined the effort in the War of the Second Coalition in 1798, along with most of the other major powers of Europe. The following year, in 1799, Napoleon took over France. War continued between France and the other powers of Europe, including Russia. However, as the coalition suffered significant defeats to the French, it became clear that Napoleon was going to be difficult to uproot. Meanwhile, Russia's relations with its ally, Britain, which had not been extraordinarily friendly for quite some time in the first place, began to worsen as a number of grievances arose, such as Russia feeling that Britain had abandoned Russian soldiers at a few points during the war, and Britain's interference with neutral shipping. The final straw came in the year 1800. 2 years before this, in 1798, France had landed on and captured the island of Malta, which had been ruled by the Knights Hospitaller, also known as the Knights of St. John, since the 16th century.
Look at this
Paul
strip.
was a protector of the Knights, and when the French had occupied the island, the Knights elected Paul the Grand Master of their order, ignoring the religious differences.
So, the Grand Master of the Order, so...
Thus, he felt compelled to defend them.
Yeah, I was
going
going to say they basically chose to be Russia?
In the first place.
Hmm.
But when Britain drove the French out of Malta in 1800, the British decided to keep the island for themselves instead of returning it to the Knights. Infuriated with Britain, feeling that Napoleon was at least more tolerable than the revolutionary government he had replaced, and believing that war against France was no longer in Russia's best interest, Paul withdrew from the war, and, while he did not officially make peace, began to communicate with the French about working towards their shared interests. As war with Britain seemed likely, Paul proposed a bold plan to Napoleon. Together, they could invade India, which had come under substantial British influence and rule by this point, force the British out
Hmm.
of the subcontinent, and claim the wealthy and fertile lands for themselves.
Was it? Did it isn't like there's a few there's like Puducherry is like French, right? And there were a few other like French stakes or whatever they would be called in India at that time, right?
The British Navy was the most powerful
Or
navy in the
would
world
have
at the
English have
time,
pushed them
and
out
was
already?
therefore a formidable barrier to any sort of sea invasion, especially an invasion of Britain itself. Thus, attacking British holdings elsewhere was simply a safer strategy. However, Russian and French interest in India was much deeper than this. The Russians had been interested in expanding into Asia, namely the Caucasus, Central Asia, and Persia, since the rule of Peter the Great the prior century,
Hmm.
an interest shared as well by Catherine the Great. They dreamed that
The
one
Great.
day Russia could enter India through these regions, though neither had managed to come anywhere close to this. The French, too, had long been interested in India, and had fought with Britain in the preceding century for control over it. Napoleon himself was well aware of its importance to Britain. When he was still a general, before he had taken over France, he had invaded Egypt, hoping to use it as a stepping stone to India. However, Napoleon's invasion of Egypt
it's still it's flabbergasting. It's so crazy to me. Like when you think typically of like the ancient times, not even ancient, it's 200 years ago. You don't think of like these widespread like it's basically a world war, right? What these guys were doing, it was basically at that time anyways, like the western powered world wars. It's fascinating. It's really fascinating.
Egypt had mostly been a failure, and never came close to anything like this. It was an extraordinarily daring proposition, but not entirely impossible. To avoid confrontation with the British Navy, the plan was to march on land most of the way,
Wow.
something that, if it could work, would have been a very
How?
serious threat. While the British had considered that something like this could happen, overall, they believed a land invasion of their Indian territory was unrealistic, and therefore were not sufficiently prepared for such a thing,
How would they
leaving
have
them
done it?
very vulnerable. As is discussed in the book The Great Game by Peter Hopkirk, the plan was for the Russians to send 35,000 soldiers through Central Asia towards India. Along the way, they would recruit native Turkoman forces to their side with the promise of plunder in India.
Huh.
Meanwhile, a French army of about the same size would descend the Danube, cross the Black Sea in Russian ships, then sail through the Don and Volga rivers, Caspian Sea, and meet up with the Russians in northern Persia, modern-day northern Iran. They would then proceed towards India.
That's
Napoleon was interested in the
interesting.
concept of invading India, but felt Paul's plan was unrealistically optimistic, perhaps to the point of absurdity, about the challenges their forces would face marching through the desert wilderness,
Yeah, I
something
wanted to
he had
say like
experience with.
some of the harshest like climates in the world. You're gonna march your armies all through that, and then also expect them to fight a battle after that.
And so decided against participating in such a venture. Indeed, Paul did not know what he
Damn,
was getting himself into.
he's looking a little rough
Lacking in
there.
knowledge and maps of the landscape, he seems to have simply assumed that there would be roads and food supplies and
No,
such things in the region which did not exist. Likewise, the idea
Th-
that the
there's not
natives
there's it's like even that is rare today. There are roads, right? But like with great effort they were made.
Central Asians would have simply joined his side in exchange for plunder was an unlikely idea. History by then
This is beautiful. I don't know where this is, but this terrain is really beautiful. Wow.
that point would have suggested the opposite reaction to a Russian army marching through their land. Worse than his understanding of Central Asia was his understanding of India. He was not familiar enough with the political and military situation there to have had a genuine strategy. Regardless, Paul remained confident of his plan
Paul's
and
looking
actually
rough here.
decided to go through with it without the French.
Really?
In early 1801, the Tsar assembled 22,000 Cossacks, not even a third of what he had hoped he and Napoleon combined could muster, and ordered them to begin riding to invade India. However,
What?
Paul was not a popular ruler. He was eccentric, volatile, and
Paul's looking pretty rough here, man.
often made unusual and impractical decisions, some of which almost suggested madness, such as, perhaps, invading India.
I mean, true, very true. Okay, so the unfortunate thing is madness was very, very common in monarchical systems. Did I say that right? Monarchical systems, monarchs. These because there's a lot of inbreeding going on. It's just gonna cut to the point. A lot of inbreeding going on. Not everyone was right in the head. Anyways,
planning and in inadequate force. He also worked to prevent corruption, which had been very profitable for various Russian officials. Thus, the Russian nobility turned against him, and
he's man's looking rough here.
in the early morning of March 24th, 1801, several of his officers broke into his bedchamber and attempted to force him to sign his abdication. Tsar Paul resisted and tried to climb up his chimney to escape, but this failed, and his officers murdered him. It is possible that the British ambassador
I didn't know
Charles Whitworth
that was
helped
why.
instigate this assassination, even though the British do not seem to have known about the invasion force heading towards India. Paul's son Alexander I took the throne. He sent a rider to meet up with the Cossack army, which had already made a long journey through the harsh Central Asian landscape in winter, to tell them, never mind, turn around. Although Hopkirk argued that this likely saved their lives, and that they likely would not have even made it to India.
No!
Alexander restored the tenuous friendship with Britain and went on to become an enemy of Napoleon. However,
Crazy,
Napoleon
man.
did not forget this idea, and was very interested in a realistic version of it. In 1807, when Napoleon was nearing the height of his power, peace came again between France and Russia, and relations improved. During these peace negotiations, which Napoleon and Tsar Alexander themselves orchestrated directly on a barge in the middle of the river Niemen, Napoleon expressed an interest in invading India, ideally alongside the Russians, even claiming he would allow Russia to keep all the territorial gains they would make there. However, a British spy who supposedly dangled hidden underneath the barge
What?
in water overheard this. When word of this reached Britain, the British East India Company began to devote more attention to protecting their possessions from land invasion, creating detailed maps of potential land routes armies might use, and securing an alliance with Persia. However, Alexander was not very interested anyway, and so once again, not much came of these ideas. Eventually, Russia and France again became enemies. In the end, Russia would play a leading role in Napoleon's downfall. Yet Russian interest in India and rivalry with Britain did not end after this. In fact, these incidents were very much a prelude to a much more intense Anglo-Russian rivalry that would develop in that region later that century, referred to as the Great Game. We hope you enjoyed this video.
Great Game.
If so, we invite you to come check out the rest of Fire of Learning, and to subscribe to see more videos like this in the future. To support the channel further, there is a link to our Patreon in the description. A special thanks to our current supporters listed here. Thank you for watching.
Very cool. Very, very, very cool. I highly recommend the channel. Go check it out, guys. Link again in the video description down below. Interesting. Like, I find it funny. It's like, oh yeah, there was a British spy just dangling in the water underneath this barge, listening on Napoleon and Alexander here, talking about invading India. It's absurd. God, and That's wild. Madness drove him to wanting to invade India via land, and then it eventually ended up killing him. Hmm. Interesting. I didn't know any of this. I didn't know any of that. I didn't know there was plans to invade India from Russia and France. Like in this aspect, anyways. Hmm. Okay. Well, you learn something new every day. Why don't we go ahead and see what's in the comments down below? Yeah. Let's read some comments, guys. Peshwa Maratha Empire, King Louis, whatever, the 16th of France, exchanged diplomats and planned to expel British from Bengal, Madras, and Bombay in 1778. Unfortunately, the plan didn't materialize. Least insane EU format. Oh, yeah. Europa Universalis. Man, I have Europa Universalis. I have 3 and 4. I have a lot of the DLC for both games, but I've never really sat down and played it. I watch people play it, but I don't sit down and like and actually play it. I'm more of a civilized oh well, I was more of a Civilization fan. Civilization 5 and 6 were my go-tos. I played a bit of 4, but going back it's a little rough in comparison. So I usually play 5, heavily modded 5, heavily modded 6, but I don't play 7. I mean, Paul's plan was batshit crazy. It's insane that he had enough pull to even suggest and order such a doomed expedition in the first place. Yeah, they let's traverse this hostile terrain with no like built up infrastructure. Some of the harshest terrain in the world, deserts that'll eat you alive. Yeah, we'll do that, no problem. Just send an entire force, entire army overland, and then expect them to fight. One Indian revolutionary named Chandra Shekhar Assad of Haryana, founder of Hindustan Socialist Republic Association, was ready to meet Stalin for gaining support of a northern invasion by Russia or delivering arms supply to the revolutionaries of Punjab. So this was in 1930s. Wow, I was gonna say before, during, and a little bit after World War II. For gaining support in northern invasion, Russia delivering arms support supplied to the revolutionaries of Punjab, Sindh, so that they can liberate India from British rule. But his plan and dream never succeeded, followed by his early death in February 1931 by getting caught by British forces in Alfred Park, now named Chandra Shekhar Assad Park after his name. Interesting. Very good video. I like the mix of topics. Part of me kind of wants this to actually have been attempted in our timeline to just see the end result now, and how different things would it be today. Um, I just don't know if they would have been successful. Like they could have gotten an army there somewhat, and I just don't think they would have been successful. And then it would have made the British rule have a more hard iron grasp on India itself, which would probably lead to them not giving India its freedom. Hmm. I'm very familiar with the Great Game. I had no idea the Emperor Paul's initial fascination with it. His mother, Katrina, had dismissed the idea entirely early on. Many thanks. Thanks for not using AI. A lot of videos use AI these days. And, AI is a tool. When it's used appropriately, I will admit it's fine. But there is an overuse of AI right now, which causes a lot of issues. Um, these would be the most random people to ever arrive in India. I mean, the French already had stakes in India. And then, I mean, Russia has stakes in India as well. Goa. I'm joking. I'm joking. There are French settlements in India. British and French have fought 3 wars in India. First person from present day Russia visited India around 15th century to sell his horses even before Vasco da Gama came to India. And Indian traders used to travel to St. Petersburg and Moscow at the 1600s. So it's not that random. Again, it's crazy because a lot of people don't think how connected these countries of our past actually were, because they're thinking, okay, they don't have the technology to, traverse these areas in a reasonable amount of time. But no, they are widespread connections everywhere. That's the reason the British made a treaty with the Sikh Empire. No. I'd love to see a thorough documentary on the history of Russia. Much love, an awesome channel. I liked for not using AI. After enjoying his voice for 10 minutes, what? What do you mean, what? What happened to your old videos? The Napoleon quote, I really liked that video. Using Barry Lyndon music in a video about Napoleon, thumbs up. No AI, here's my like and sub. All right. Okay. Anyways, thank you for watching. Again, link to the video is in the description down below. Make sure to go check it out. And I'll catch you next time, yeah? Take care, goodbye.